Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming. I'm Jonathan Fung. I'm a faculty member in physics and astronomy. And on behalf of the organizing committee, it's really nice to welcome everybody here in the room and also all the people who are on Zoom. You are here for a wonderfully special occasion, as we have Professor Glenda Flores, who will be talking soon. This is the last talk of this, our 11th season of What Matters to Me and Why. How many of you are here at What Matters to Me and Why for the first time? Just raise your hand. Awesome. Okay. So for those of you who are here for the first time, let me provide a super brief introduction. So as I say, we've been doing this for 11 years. It provides a chance for faculty and staff, one of them a month during the academic year, to come and share a bit about their lives, their personal experiences, their motivations, their beliefs, their ups, their downs throughout their life, and basically whatever matters to them and why. So it's a very unusual chance to see sort of an inside look at the faculty and staff who kind of help make UCI what it is. In the last 11 years, we have talks that have ranged all over the place. I've sat in this room and cried along with the speakers and laughed along with the speakers. It's just a wonderful series, and I hope you'll enjoy it today. And it certainly gives us a chance to celebrate both the diversity of the people here, but also the commonalities that bind us together. As you have seen, these talks are videotaped. We now have, 76 talks on the web. And so I encourage you to take a look at those. They make for a wonderful few days of binge watching if you really want to. So if you don't want to be in the video, just don't sit in the front. It's not so bad right now. Another sort of housekeeping point is that we will send you a questionnaire afterwards, and we'd encourage you to fill it out, because that's how we get ideas for new speakers. And last, as you know, everyone who's registered gets a free lunch on your way out. So since COVID, it's not eaten here, but it's a sort of grab-and-go version. But please remember to take one on your way out. If you are here but didn't register, maybe you could just wait a little bit, make sure everyone who registered takes theirs first. Okay? As this is the last talk of the season, it's our tradition to actually recognize the people who make it possible. So first, let me thank the staff videographers from UCI Media. So that's Will Alvarez, Kyle Good, and Natalie Hadland. So thank you, guys. They are the ones who, of course, make possible these really wonderful professional videos that are basically the legacy, the lasting legacy of What Matters to Me and Why on the web. So I'd encourage you to go check those out again. Second is the organizing committee. So we have a committee of something around 10 people. This includes faculty, staff, and students, graduate students and undergrads, who basically put together the program every year. So we decide, we read all the questionnaires, we decide who to invite, we convince them to say yes, we encourage them to let us help them develop their talks, and of course provide all the logistical support for the slides and whatever else needs to be done. So in this last year, we have the following people on the committee: Claire Yu, Kim Ayala, Kevin Bossenmeyer, Rachel Corral, Joseph Morales, Debbie Nielsen, Kat Wong, and also students, Isabella Cao, Pedro Puentes, and Elliot Wong Toy. And so some of them are in class right now, some of them are on Zoom, but for those who are in the room, maybe you could stand and we could all thank you. All right, and let me just say that this is actually a bit bittersweet for me, but I am actually stepping down as chair of the organizing committee. But I am very happy that Claire Yu here is taking over as chair, and it'll be great to see how this program goes under her. So thank you very much, Claire, for taking that on. Last but not least, maybe we could ask Debbie Nielsen to come in. Yeah. So Debbie Nielsen doesn't usually like to be recognized, but she's always in the back as I wait for her to come out. Early on in this, we asked her if she might want to give a What Matters to Me and Why talk. And she said basically, I think I'd rather die. So, so she's not someone who's going to typically do this, but Great, Debbie, hi, wonderful. Come on up, come on up. No, you have to come up this time. All right, so Debbie has been essential to what matters to me in Hawaii, and actually many, many other things here at UCI. She's been at UCI for, what, 25 years, I believe? 28, okay, and has worked, I know, in the University Extension with corporate relations, corporate training programs, Cal IT Squared, the Office of the Chancellor now, and has helped not just What Matters to Me in Hawaii, but also the Swan Shakespeare Festival, Illuminations, all sorts of things that really make this place a rich and wonderful place to work and be a student. Just from my perspective, I still remember in 2011, the day that Chancellor Drake, not President Drake, but at that time Chancellor Drake, called us in and told us that our proposal to start this thing was a go, and introduced me to Debbie. And it's like, okay, hello, now let's make a program. And ever since then, we've been working together. And I have to say, this has been probably definitely the most fun committee I've ever been on, and also one of the most meaningful service experiences here. And that's largely due to Debbie. So, yeah, so why am I saying all this? Because, because Debbie is retiring. And so after 28 years, she's stepping down. She will, I think, hopefully be staying around to help train a new generation of people, which we will be very grateful for. But this is her last official What Matters to Me in Hawaii talk as project manager extraordinaire, and so we just want to thank her. So Debbie, come on. Okay, so I think that's it for these sort of end of year things. One thing we do every single talk, because this does draw people from all over the campus, is we ask you to just spend 1 or 2 minutes to say hi to your neighbor. Okay, so we will just take a few minutes of break. Please say hi, what part of the campus you're from, are you staff, faculty, or student? And online, if you want to type in the chat who you are, please do that. And we'll come back and have the introduction of our speaker.
Okay, I think we'll come back. I'm glad you all had a good time talking to your neighbor and introducing yourself. Good afternoon, and thank you for attending today. My name is Kimberly Ayala, and I'm the retired director of the Undergraduate Undeclared Advising Office in the Division of Undergraduate Education. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Glenda Marisol Flores. Professor Flores is an associate professor of Chicano-Latino Studies here at UCI. Her book, Latina Teachers Creating Careers in Guardian Culture, won the 2018 Outstanding Contribution to Scholarship Book Award from the Race, Gender, and Class Selection of the American Sociological Association. Her research on Latina professionals, in particular Latina teachers, has been published in several venues, such as the Quantitative Sociology, City and Community, Ethnography, and Gender Work and Organization. Her research agenda centers on social mobility patterns of Latinas and Latinos into the middle class and their workplace experience in the white-collar world, especially teaching and medicine and how Latino cultures emerge in their fields. She is a co-principal investigator of a nearly $3 million National Science Foundation Fund project that seeks to improve STEM success among underrepresented students. Her new book, Projects, is on Latina, Latino, and Latinx physicians and is tentatively titled The Weight of the White Coat, Gender, Race, and Culture in the Lives of Latino and Latina Physicians. Welcome, Glenda.
Wow, I just want to say that I'm incredibly honored to be giving this talk today. I have to admit that it was a little stressful for me putting it together, as I kind of felt that when I received the ask and the invitation, I thought, well, I don't really have an interesting life. And kind of that I wasn't deserving, right, of this platform. And then I had to remind myself that I'm on the verge, right, of finishing my second book on Latina physicians. I'm on my way, hopefully, to becoming a full professor, but that imposter syndrome creeped in, and it still rears its head even today. And I didn't recognize that that's what was happening and that's what I was feeling until one of my friends, a close friend and a colleague, pointed it out, and they said, you know that this is part of that. That's kind of what's happening. And so thinking about that, it really helped me figure out how I could tie this talk together. And it's really nice to see all of you here today and to also see a lot of friendly faces. And some of you I might actually incorporate now into my presentation, that I'm seeing that you're here and you were very meaningful on my pathway. And so I thought, you know, I'll start at the beginning just to put everything into context and how work and education just profoundly influenced my world, how I see the world, and because many of the pieces do come together in a way. So I want to begin by showing you this picture. And this is a picture that highlights my family's humble beginnings from my mother's side. So my mother was raised in a small town called Santa Juana, Zacatecas. It's a central state in Mexico. And it's so small and hidden, right, in the hills, that if you didn't know it was there, you would just drive by it. And this is a picture inside of their home, and where my grandmother and her daughters would wash the family's clothes. So it's known as, you know, a lavadero. And I've shown this picture in some of my undergraduate classes, especially my gender and ethnicity class, so that students can start to think about, you know, their social position, social location, and how that influences how they interpret and see the world. And so they wash their clothes here, or they would carry it, right, and wash it in a local river. And so my mother, she came from a big family. She was one of 7 sisters, 7 girls, only 6 of them are pictured here. She also had 7 brothers. And you'll see, right, that all of her sisters kind of took these pictures, portraits in Mexico. And slowly, they all started to move to the United States in search of work. And my mom is this person right here. And she did not want to move to the United States. She wanted to stay back home with her mother, but she was encouraged, right, and pushed. No, you have to go and find a job and send money back home. And so one of her sisters, this one right here, her name is Imelda, she was really the one that received her sisters once they crossed through what my mom would call El Cerro, which is the mountains and the hills, right? So she came walking with what's known as a coyote or a smuggler. And then once they arrived, her sister was here to receive her, the rest of the sisters, and her brothers. So my father, on the other hand, was also born in Zacatecas, but his parents moved to the Sonora, Arizona border, also in search of work. So he was raised in a border town, and he would tell us stories about how, as he was the eldest boy in his family, he started working at a very young age by selling chiclets and products along the border, right, along the borderline as people would cross by into the United States. And so his side of the family was also big. He had 6 brothers and 4 sisters. And they all, you know, found themselves in the United States looking for work. So in some ways, I feel like I had the best of both worlds in that I was lucky enough to be able to travel and see and experience, right, how my mother was raised in a very small village. And I could also see the nuances in their experiences because my father was raised in a border town, more of a kind of like a city feel. And what was apparent to me also when I saw their life experiences is that, you know, they grew up in a more patriarchal, there's patriarchy here in the United States, but when they settled here, my mother's side of the family became a matriarchy, right? And our leader, kind of, so to speak, was my mother's sister, right? So she was the one that we sought and looked for guidance, and she would help, you know, a lot of people and all of us in our trajectories. So when they arrived to the United States, right, my parents settled in the city of Santa Ana, which is right next door. And when they settled here, they were undocumented immigrants. So they were here working without papers for a while until they were helped by Ronald Reagan's amnesty program. And my mother, right, was a devout Catholic, and she had heard that becoming a citizen, right, or to legalize her status would help her children with school. And so she, you know, with the help of her church, or a church that she was in Santa Ana, that would help them apply for naturalization status, she went through that program. And my father, you know, he was very vocal about us doing well in school. And he wanted us to have opportunities that he never had. He would say that if he had the opportunity to go to school, he would have liked to have become a doctor. So this encouragement was really important to me and my desire to do well in school. And so my dad and one of his brothers actually built, you know, this is just a picture of him doing construction. To me, it was always amazing that, you know, somebody that had no formal training in, you know, being an architect or any classes, that he could build structures, right? And to me, this is what stood out a lot about my family, that they didn't have access to education, right? They had less than a middle school education, most of them. And here he's building, right, a house. He's building this little house, a little school, or what we called La Escuelita. And you kind of see here in this image, it's just me and my brother, and I'm holding like a tape, and I'm sticking these little Miss Piggy posters to the structure. But inside it had a little chalkboard, a desk, some chairs, and this served as the place that a lot of other children in the neighborhood would come, right? And we would play, practice being a teacher, give each other homework assignments, discipline each other also if we didn't do, right, the homework. And so we, you know, this is kind of a way that my father and my family demonstrated the importance of school, right, for us, even though they didn't have, they couldn't go themselves. So here you'll also see that in the background where they ended up settling, there's just a lot of dirt and cacti. There wasn't very much in Santa Ana back then at that time. And my father ended up building, right, a house for us with like leftover wood that he had from his job when he worked in construction. So he would bring, you know, some materials back home, and he ended up building, right, a house, which to me is just amazing that there is this structure, these remnants, right, from him left behind. And my mom, she still lives there, right? And so there's a lot of meaning that she has attached to the house, and a lot of love there as well. So for me, however, going to school, right, Santa Ana schools, some kids love school, right? While others sit next to their kindergarten teacher crying because they want to go home. So I was the latter. I was, you know, one of the kids that would cry. And this is because, you know, English was not my first language. I started learning English when I was 8 as the bilingual education program that was implemented in the school. And also, I like to explore my environments, you know, slowly. And I was able to adjust with these bilingual programs, but I still wasn't the greatest student. So with much frustration, my mom, when she would go to those parent-teacher conferences, would always say, puros llantos, like a lot of crying. She cries because she cannot figure out how to do her homework. She struggles. And through the years, initially, math was one of the subjects that I struggled through because my parents were teaching me how to do math problems the way that they had learned in the home country, which was different than the way that I was being taught in the United States. And so this, eventually got solved through these meetings, but it was a frustration that I had. And so the message, though, that I took away from that was that they cared about me and doing well in school. And they often let me know that education was important and that I needed to, try to figure it out in the ways that I could. So one of those ways was by my dad building me this little school, and for the community as well. And also my mother, she was amazing in that she would do as much as possible with the very little that we had. She once bought me a random math book from a local flea market that she saw, and she saw, okay, this has like arithmetic math problems and it has the answers in the back. You can use this to study more. And I still have that arithmetic book in the place where I live to remind myself that I'm capable and I can figure these things out. And another occasion, my mom decided to buy an entire encyclopedia. Okay, this is back in the day, right? Now we have like Wikipedia and all of that. But she decided to buy an entire encyclopedia from the library in Santa Ana, and so that my siblings and I could like look through it, right? And this is A to Z with double M, double L, all of that. And it was heavy. And so she did not drive. My mother does not drive. She has an eye condition known as retinitis pigmentosa. And we ended up getting a shopping cart, right? And putting all of the encyclopedias into the shopping cart, walked all the way home in the sun. It was heavy, but it also just showed me, right, that they care and they're trying and they're doing the best that they can, right? And so throughout my schooling, work was very central to my life. And I'm always surprised, right, when some people might say that research or a tenure track job might have been their first job. And it's such different routes because my experience was different. So while my father was building that house in the back, we worked at a cleaner's. So he was in construction. He ended up leaving construction because he thought it was a lot of wear and tear on his body. And so he thought maybe in a cleaner's, right, it'll be a little bit better. And so he was a small business owner, learning how to run this on his own. And we ended up working with him in this cleaner's as young as I was around 10 when we started going there. And so nowadays, sometimes I still like to drive by the cleaners, the place where I worked alongside with them, because just to remember how far we've come, right? And to remember how hard it was. And I show these images because each of these jobs has a different takeaway for me, and I learned different things on them. So the cleaners was kind of like my first job, right? My first place where I learned how to answer phones, deposit checks, operate big irons, customer service, and where I learned to interact with the customers. My job was putting sometimes the little tags on the clothes so that you would know what's the order, taking the money, all of that. And I finagled right away saying, okay, Dad, if I write all of the numbers down on this notebook so we don't lose track of the clothes or anything, can I get $1, right? $1 for each of these that I write down, and he agreed. So it wasn't always work at the cleaners, right? I got to spend a lot of time with my father. My mother would, come on the bus from Santa Ana. The cleaners was located in Anaheim, and to work with him as well. After she finished her morning job at an elementary school, she worked as a lunch lady or a noon supervisor, so she would supervise children on the playground, help them open, their milks and things like that. But it wasn't all work at the cleaners, right? On some days, I got to go to a nearby arcade and play air hockey with my 2 younger brothers. But the summers was when it was really hard because it was so hot, right? So I was one of those kids that would dread the summers when they came because that meant that my dad would decide, okay, which one of my kids is going to help me in the cleaners. And he would wake us up at 6 in the morning, one of us. I'm like, please don't pick me, please pick my brother, right? It was often me because I was the older one and probably a little bit more responsible. And then I would come back home, right, at 6 p.m. My other job, right, this is a job that I had when I was in high school at Dearden's. When I finished high school, and this, if you're not familiar with Dearden's, it was a furniture store that mostly catered to Latino immigrant families. And my first year at UC Irvine, and I'll talk about my experience at UCI, I still tried to, work at Dearden's on the weekends. But one of the things that I learned, right, about Dearden's is that I learned so much about socioeconomic diversity within the Latino population, because most of the floor sellers, they were more affluent, middle class, but a lot of the people making the purchases, right, were poor immigrant Latinos. And Dearden's had a service that if people bought something like a big kitchen set or a bedroom set, right, a dining room, that people could cash their checks there with not any additional, they wouldn't take a percentage off of it, but they're also paying off the big furniture that they just bought. And so people would cash their checks there all of the time. And I worked as one of the person that would cash their checks and took their payments. So this is where I learned, or I think maybe that sociology was just in me and that ethnography, because this is where I saw that, people are working in different places. I also noticed gardeners, when gardeners would come in, they would come in with a stack, right, of personal checks that they received from their employers. So to me, then I'm thinking, they have a route, right? They have a route of houses. And so I was able to kind of get a glimpse of their inner, their lives or what was happening there. And then the last job that I had was at Golden Creek Inn. I think they changed the name, but it's here in Irvine. And I worked at this job when I was an undergrad here at UCI. I needed a job that was closer to get to after classes. And at Golden Creek Inn, I was a waitress. And so my job was to learn, right, all of the orders, the food orders for the residents that live there, elderly residents, and to learn what they can eat and what they can't eat, right? If someone's diabetic, don't give them like a soda, right? And even though people would try to finagle and get those from you, you had to, say, no, your family won't allow this, right? And so I learned a lot about aging population and care work, right? And who was providing the care in the job. So these jobs, right, were what I held as I went through my schooling. And so one of the schools that I went to, high school, was Santa Ana High School. Maybe you're familiar with it. Some people might have done research on this school. When I was there, it was very overcrowded, but we also had a lot of dedicated teachers. And I remember one of my favorite teachers was Mr. Larry Espinoza. He was my math analysis teacher and probably the first, right, Latino teacher in like STEM that I had ever. But it was so crowded. I remember that, if you had a class on one side of the campus and you had to get to the other side, I'm really trying to get there, on time. You have a couple of minutes, and one of our teachers would get upset if we wouldn't get there on time, and she said, the next time, if you're not here on time, I'm gonna lock you out. And she did. I got right to the door. I'm like, I tried, I'm trying to get through everybody. And then I had to go to Saturday school because I didn't get there on time. So, it was a really Santa Ana High School did have a lot of resources, courses for us, but as a first generation college student, I did not know how to navigate, right, getting into college or any of that. So I had, a counselor there that noticed that I was willing to put in the work. But I didn't know, right, what I needed to do in order to go on to a college. One of the experiences that I also had in Santa Ana High School is I was really good at writing, and I was in these AP, writing classes. And at one point, I'll just share this short story, is I wrote a paper on Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, and it was such a good analysis. I thought, oh, wow, I put my heart and soul into this paper. Our English teacher called several of us into a meeting after school. It wasn't just me, there were a couple of other people there. And she was asking us questions. I thought she was gonna praise us, for our hard work. but a lot of the questions didn't match, right, what I was expecting. And so I knew there was something wrong because she asked, how did you write this paper, right? So she asked if I had used Cliff Notes, and I responded, I wrote it on the kitchen table. You know, I did this, and she asked if I had used Cliff Notes. And I said, I do not know what those are, because I did not know. And at the time, they were like little yellow booklets, I guess, I found out. And so it was a little I was heartbroken, because I realized that, you know, she underestimated me and my peers, and her own teaching, because she was the one that was teaching us. And so I say that because sometimes, you know, things like that might happen. They might bring us down. But it's also, you know, in that case, it was trying to tell, you know, this teacher, no, you're actually, like, we're learning, right? We're actually learning in the classroom. And there were, you know, other experiences living in Santa Ana that were difficult, with one of my young friends who was almost kidnapped, right? Like right in front of us. We were walking home from school and someone almost snatched her. So having those things, right, they were always like in the back of my mind of danger, peril, things that could happen. And we were very young when that happened, but we always, you know, tried to walk together and with other people on our way home. So I've shared these experiences because we all have different moments and struggles that affect us, and these distractions, right? They may hurt, frustrate, or even defeat us momentarily. But the best thing to do is to ask for help and find ways, or find people that can help you overcome these obstacles. So one of the reasons that I was able, you know, to get from Santa Ana High School to UC Irvine was because of that college counselor that, you know, kind of pulled us out of class and had us apply on the spot to UC system. And at that time, I didn't really know what classes you could pick or what majors you could pick, what institution. And I picked UC Irvine was one of the selections because my father worked in construction, and he worked here in Irvine, right, building a lot of the places here. And he said, well, I think that there is a college in Irvine. You should go there, right? It's nearby. And so I did, and I ended up, you know, applying there. But it also kind of just shows my cultural capital, right? And how I was still kind of like accumulating it. I didn't really have other forms of capital that other people might have, right? That might have grown up with college-educated parents. And so I remember the day that I moved to UC Irvine from Santa Ana. And this is where gender dynamics come in. And this is because my mother wanted me to take the bus, right, from Santa Ana to UCI. It's not that far. I didn't drive. And she was very upset when I moved on campus for my first year. So I lived in Middle Earth. I lived in Hobbiton. I am so, you know, excited, and I was so happy to see Jason Cruz here because he was, you know, the resident advisor of Hobbiton at that time. So for me, it's like, oh, he's here. And so yeah, I lived in Hobbiton. I was very lucky to live in Hobbiton with my best friend from high school. Her name is Wendy. And Wendy is Mexican and Central American, Honduran. And so we were trying to navigate this space together. And our first year, it was very difficult that I almost, you know, decided to just leave campus and go back home. And I think it was my friend Wendy that intervened and went and talked to Jason and told him, I don't know what she said, maybe, like Glenda wants to leave. And eventually I didn't, you know, I ended up staying. And I am very grateful that, you know, Jason was there to help me. Other times that I've given talks, I share about how still my mother was very supportive of my education, even though she was a little unhappy that I moved out because there were these gendered expectations that I shouldn't move out at that time. But because I lived in Hobbiton, if you're ever in Middle Earth, you know, it's kind of like right up on the street. You drive up there. And so the one time I got sick and I'm calling my mom and I wasn't, you know, I was struggling as my first year at UC Irvine, and she took the bus, right, from Santa Ana all the way. I don't know how she got up the hill, right, to Middle Earth, and she's just outside yelling my name, right, and she's just yelling with chicken soup. She was bringing me chicken soup, and she's yelling, you know, my middle name is Marisol, so she's just like, Mari, Mari, and then they open the door, a student opens the door, someone else, and she's like, Glenda? And then they're like, oh, okay, they let her in. And then she went back home, right? She took like a 2-hour, the bus, you know, there to bring me soup and then to go back home. So it was like she's still supporting me, even though initially it was a little difficult. But I'm still friends with Wendy today, you know. I've known her since we were 11, and it's been part of our, you know, lives to figure out these higher educational spaces. So I also, you know, when I moved to UCI, one other thing that I'll share is that, and this is where I kind of felt where I started this talk about feeling like I wasn't deserving of the platform. It could be, you know, my working class background. When I also moved to UCI, my father had this very loud powder blue van, right? And it was so loud, you knew that we were coming. And when I was gonna move into campus, he invited everybody, right? Except for my mom, because she didn't wanna come. But he invited my brothers, who are pictured here. He invited my uncle, my cousin, so everybody, you know, helped me lug something into Hobbiton, where I lived. And so I show, you know, this picture. These are my two younger brothers. One of them is named Jorge, the other one is named Ricky, or Ricardo. He is a dentist. So when Ricky went off to his school, he ended up going to UC Berkeley. My mom actually, at that point, I think they learned from the oldest, right? They must learn from the oldest, and then they kind of help the rest. And I think he might have learned from me too, right? I helped him with his college applications and you know, how to write, all of that. So we kind of see that sibling support now. But he, you know, we drove up there, we left him at school, and now he's a dentist in Northern California in Vacaville. He helps mostly agricultural workers who have difficulty, right, getting care. And my other brother, he works with children that have autism or have like special needs that they need to get help with. And so, you know, our parents were very like instrumental and helpful for us. And the last, you know, couple of slides that I want to show are how when I was in undergrad, right, I started as a Spanish language and culture major because I was adamant that I was going to become a bilingual elementary school teacher. My goal was to go back to Santa Ana and help, right, other students. I quickly learned, however, that when I started at UCI, getting here was, you know, adjusting was great, but getting a D- on my first college paper, which was in Spanish, was not such a great feeling, right? And then my Spanish, you know, professor at the time said that my writing was colloquial. And I thought, what is colloquial? I don't know what that means. And then they told me it's street talk. And I thought, what did I learn, right? What did my parents teach me? And it kind of, you know, goes along with what the assets that my parents had, right? And so then I took it upon myself, okay, now I need to learn. How do I write a paper in college? How do I do this, you know, in my native language? And so I had to learn, you know, my own style, and over time I became, you know, better at it. But it was in my classes that I came across Chicano Latino Studies. And this is where I learned more about Chavez Ravine and the Bracero program. And this was a part of my history, right, that was overlooked in my schooling. And, you know, kind of like coincidentally, like it all comes together, is when I went back home to visit my family, my mother's house, I came across this picture, and I thought, what is this picture? And this is a picture of my grandfather, my father's father, working with his brother in the fields as braceros, right? For Golden Treat in Mendota, California. And this was something that my grandfather didn't really want to talk about, his experience there, because it was very dehumanizing, right? And this often meant that he would leave my grandmother behind with 14 children, and she's trying to figure out how she's going to make everything work, how she will make ends meet. This is inside of the house in the kitchen. And so it really just reflected, a lot of the work that some of the people in my department do. And just, it's just amazing, right? Just seeing that this life history and realizing that people are doing this work and you can connect with it. So funny story, there is a professor in our department, Gil Gonzalez, who did a film on the Bracero program, and I actually showed it to my mom and her sister so that they could learn a little bit more about what their father was going through, because he wouldn't talk about it very much. And so I kind of just show this to show that, this is my capital, my family history, and I've turned it into an asset, my own asset, right, that I've leveraged in my work. It's kind of this hands-on experience that I've had. And I always reflect back to it when I put together my own research projects, when I'm figuring out my questions, when I'm thinking about nuances in different experiences. And so this is, another image that I came across, and this is from my father's side. And his name was Domingo Flores, and you can see, right, his profession, he was a musician, he was a mariachi. And so when they moved to the border, the US-Mexico border, the way that he tried to make ends meet was by being in a mariachi group, which over time we kind of learned they were pretty good. And he would practice the lyrics to songs, right, on a very old typewriter. And he, just seeing this for me is like these little pieces of history, and they kind of help me put together, right, these different elements of my life, of my parents' lives as well. And it's important for me to preserve it and to teach students in my classes, right, that it's important to learn pieces like elements of your history, and that you can use it as, educational material in your courses, and it's important. And so, with that, right, for graduate school, I ended up going to the University of Southern California, where I studied sociology, because I was always interested in gender and work. That was just something that I was always gravitating to, because I had worked so much as a child. And one of the people that I worked with was Pierrette Sotelo, who wrote the book Domestica on domestic workers. And I actually just had lunch with her last week because she retired. So she's retiring the field. She's moving to Santa Fe. And my first project on Latina teachers, that first book, was because I was having a lunch with Pierrette. I was doubting whether I should have gone to get a PhD in sociology. I had applied to master's programs in education and also doctoral programs, because I had very good mentors that were like, hey, you can do this, you can do research. And I thought, maybe, right? It's not a dream that I had at the time. It wasn't something that I was thinking about. It was really this lunch that I had with my mentor, Pierrette Sotelo, who said, I was talking a lot about teachers and school and how I missed, right, being in the elementary school classroom, because when I was here at UCI, I had actually been a part of a program that would place you in schools in Santa Ana. That's, I was offered a job and thinking, should I take this job? Should I go this other way, right? Should I take this job where I can start earning money and financially solvent my family, or go this other route that's going to take a little bit longer? And ultimately, it was Pierrette who said, why don't you do a study of Latina teachers? And for me, I thought, why didn't I think, right, that this is something that's possible and that I can do? And that's where my career, right, as a scholar, as a person that focuses on intersectionalities, work, gender, and education really took off from there. And so, you know, one of the important things for me now is to go back still to the elementary school. So this is kind of like Read Across America Day, and going back and just talking with students there. And, you know, doing this job now for me is kind of like a dream that I didn't have as a child, something that I wasn't thinking about. And it wasn't until that senior year of college that I thought maybe it was a possibility. And so now I really make it, you know, my mission to be, you know, a mentor for other students here on campus and to help them, right, see the beauty, right, of their own histories and how they can incorporate those elements into whatever research endeavors or whatever it is that they want to pursue. So thank you.
Hello? Good. So thank you, such a wonderful talk. We now have time for some questions, Q&A. So if you're in the room, please raise your hand, and either Kim or I will bring over the mic. It's important so that we can all hear you, but even more so that it shows up on the videotape. If you are on Zoom, you can either raise your virtual hand and we will call on you, or type a question into the chat and we'll read it out for you. Okay.
Thank you so much, Glenda, for that beautiful presentation. I find it remarkable and touching that your parents came up with this idea of building a small school in your backyard, and you also mentioned that they were teaching you math in a way that was taught in Mexico, and that this had an impact on you. And it made me wonder if they ever spoke to you about what their experiences were like in school in Mexico, even though they didn't, you know, go as far as you did, if they ever shared any of that with you, and if you could share any of those experiences with us.
Yes, so they did go to school for, you know, a short part of their lives. And they, at least on my mother's side, she would talk about what a beautiful experience it was for them, right, to go to school with their siblings and other children that were part of their small village. Given like the resources that they had for my father, because he was in a more rural area, grew up on a kind of like a mountain, the school was just like one, you know, really one room, and where it was one person that would, you know, teach maybe 2 children at a time that were living there. But, you know, fun fact is that my father would always say that he named me after a teacher that he had, that her name was Glenda. And I thought, what? That's interesting. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Flores, for that presentation. I'm wondering what advice you would give us, and as well as youth in general, about, you did a wonderful job talking about how you translated your background and family history and experiences into cultural capital, right? And so how can we best promote that kind of asset orientation rather than the cultural deficit model in many times the way we're looking at work? Thank you.
Yes, I love that question because, you know, one of what I kept hearing when I was in graduate school was about Latino cultures or just other, you know, people of color cultures, and seeing it as a deficit. And I'm like, why is it always bad? Is it always bad? And so for me, that just started getting me thinking about, okay, well, how can we change the framing? And one of the ways that I at least try to do that in my classes is to get students thinking about, you know, things that might have helped them on their path. And, you know, also speaking back to a lot of the scholarship and the literature, and maybe there's a way that we can change the perspective and in order to like ensure that they can keep going, right, or promote their mobility.
Hi, I want to say thank you so much for your talk. A lot of what you said resonated with me as someone who's in similar shoes as yours. I want to say that I'm pursuing a career in medicine, and part of the reason I came today was to learn more about what inspired you to do the work you're doing, like on your book, The Weight of the White Coat, and what kind of advice would you give to someone like myself who wants to connect with what led them to where they are today, but be able to do so in a way that will educate and heal their future patients?
Yeah, so The Weight of the White Coat, I really liked writing this book. And part of that is just the stories that I was able to collect from people and the interviews. And that book really emerged from the first one on Latina teachers, where a lot of the women that I interviewed, it was mostly women, would say that they had a degree in STEM, right? They had a degree in biology or mathematics, computer science, and they were steered or socially, right? They went into teaching, and I thought, well, how is it, those that are going into medicine, what does that pathway look like? And so there's so much that I could talk about for that book, but it really is the social capital, right? Knowing people, even having someone that's already a doctor, like within your network, is so important. And for a lot of the people so far that I've interviewed that were going to schools, K through 12 schools, it was really difficult for them to say, I had a parent that was a doctor, or I knew, right, a place that I could just shadow or get like meaningful shadowing experiences. And by that, I mean actually shadowing a doctor, not, cleaning like the gurneys. And so that, really made a difference for them.
Hi, I just wanted to start off by thanking you for such an amazing presentation. As a child of immigrant parents, it really resonated with me on how you were so curious and passionate to find out more about your roots. With that being said, I was just kind of curious to see how learning more about your roots and specifically the Chicano studies and how that relates to your book on healthcare and how that relates to just healthcare in the Hispanic community in general.
So I will say that for me, ethnic studies really just opened my eyes, and I fell in love with a lot of the classes that I was taking, the history, the art, all of that. I was just starting to like soak it all in, and how it was helpful for me is I also started to take classes that had more of a health focus as an undergrad. And, and then I am able to connect it to my own family's experiences and how it was difficult for them to access healthcare, right? And we would go across the border to Sonora, where my father was familiar, and he would seek treatment over there that was quicker and that he could afford, and then come back. So for me, thinking, wow, you would drive, all the way over there to get care, but it was a lot of that was as a result of them being undocumented, right? So then thinking about social structure, also thinking about the different ways that they try to help themselves, their own ailments, in the absence of being able to actually see or get care at a facility. And so all of that, is something that I'm working through actually on the last chapter of the book, and thinking through about healthcare and doctor-patient interactions, right? And how there may be a language barrier, which might be difficult, and then the other part of it is also providing care, right? Providing adequate care to people. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm going to ask Professor Yu to close us out, but before we do that, just let's thank Professor Flores again for such a beautiful talk.
Thank you.
Before we leave, this is the last talk of this season. I just want to take a moment to thank Jonathan Fung, who is started this 11 years ago and has faithfully chaired it. This would not exist without his efforts to sell it to the chancellor, to sell it to the campus, to run this for 11 years, and somehow he conned me into taking over as chair of the planning committee. But I think we should give Jonathan a hand for all that he has done for this program. And with that, I'll wish you well, and I hope you have a great summer.